Hey everyone, it's Senior Managing Editor of Water and Waste Digest, Bob Crossan, and today I have with me Ed Butts. He's the owner of 4B Engineering, and he's also our 2021 WWD Industry Icon. He holds multiple licenses in the state of Oregon for engineering, and perhaps most impressively, he's earned them through good old-fashioned self-study. We'll talk about his career path, challenges the self-study had brought him, and some of the satisfaction of actually accomplishing everything through self-study. So we're going to talk about all that and more in our interview today. So Ed, thank you so much for being here and congratulations on being our industry icon for 2021.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I know that when I called you and asked you about this, you were extremely humbled by this title of industry icon. Could you describe what it meant to you to hear that this was being awarded to you?
Well, I'm hopeful that this is more of a way of perpetuating to younger folks, what they can do in the industry and through hard work and even some dedication, they're able to succeed maybe when they didn't believe they could. Hopefully, that will come out of this more than anything.
Yeah, on that note, I mean, the determination that you've shown in your career by using self-study to maintain your licensing and to gain the success that you've had is really critical to your story. Could you talk a little bit about your career path and how that self-study kind of fell into place with you?
It's a little lengthy and complicated, but to briefly tell it, I was born into the water business. My father was a water well driller, and so my youth was constantly exposed to waterworks and well drilling and things that went with it. And for the first few years of my career, I actually did water pump work and well drilling and installation. And because I also thought I was some kind of a basketball star, I started injuring myself playing basketball. And because of that, I had to get back surgery. And that almost immediately took me away from the profession that I thought I'd be doing for most of my life. And uh, by that time, I was already married and had our first child. So it wasn't practical or economical, especially in those days, the late '70s. The economy wasn't real good, and it wasn't conducive to actually go to college at that time. But I knew I had to get into something different that used my mind more than my body, and I was able to apply myself to the study that goes with learning the profession of engineering. I can't say it was all through self-study. There were classes in advanced math and things that I had to take to understand the fundamentals of engineering.
Mhm.
And so I did take some classes in that, but most of it was the actual practice was done through self-study.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a really rare thing to hear about these days, with a lot of licensing requiring degrees of some sort or different types of accreditation in that regard. So it was just that to me was really stood out for you as why we could consider you an industry icon because it is so rare these days to see something like that and to highlight that hey, you can still be really successful if you just put down your nose and really get into
Right.
dig into the books and stuff.
And you're right, it's getting harder all the time. When I first became licensed in the mid 80s, more states recognized the apprentice way of doing it, you might call it. And I was able to easily gain license in Oregon through that. And then most states recognized the reciprocity that allowed me to transfer between states. But even today, there's states that I'm unable to be licensed in because of that requirement of a 4-year degree. But most of them are somewhat flexible in that. And
Mhm.
certainly everyone I've been licensed in, which is just the West Coast, Oregon, Washington, and Oregon.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that brought with it? Obviously, like self-study requires a lot of work on your end and like I'm sure late nights just like pouring through books and highlighting stuff and really trying to engage your brain. But what are some of the other challenges? We talked a little bit about how there were cultural challenges as well, where people would question what you could do, even though you had a track record that showed that you could do it.
I faced that for the first 10 years of my career. Even after I became licensed, I still had issues with some people that felt that, and often they were other engineers who felt that you could not become a registered professional engineer without going through the 4 years of college and all the things that went with it. But I attribute a lot of the success to my wife because she was very supportive and she also helped distract the kids, when they were young, and it's sometimes hard to dedicate the time when you've got a young family and you're trying to give balanced time in both directions. And um, I'm just glad that it worked out the way it did. But you're right, there were a lot of late nights sitting at the kitchen table with books spread out all over and trying to understand the fundamentals. Once I grasped the fundamentals involved in science and engineering, the rest sort of fell into place. I'd been working around it so long that I understood the mechanics involved in a lot of engineering, and and as I grew professionally, I was able to take on more. That's one of the reasons I became licensed in 4 branches, because I work in all 4 branches, and I'm able to apply the basic fundamentals to what's required in each practice branch or each branch I practice in.
Yeah, I think that that's really interesting because we also talked. You mentioned your basketball, your love for the game of basketball, and how important that was to you in your life for so many years. But one of the things that we talked about when we had our phone interview was about how the intersection of like the skills and stuff when it comes to basketball plays and creating plays and how it all kind of like congeals and works together, and how that basic fundamental is very similar to how a water treatment plant works. All the pieces need to be in the right spot. They all need to be working together to get the thing to work properly. In a way, making a basketball play is engineering.
You're right. I mean, there's certain life fundamentals that apply in both sports, in the game of basketball anyway, as well as professional practice. I mean, if you've got a project that you're working on a design for, there's always got to be some element of teamwork involved in order to cut across all the various disciplines and the things that you have to do to make a project work. And I don't claim to have the ability to do everything that might be required on a project. So that's where I have to bring in people like geotechnical engineers and others that can help me with that element of the project. So sometimes, you've got to apply the team element in order to make these things, especially with the time constraints we're often under. Um, and it does sort of have an analogy to the game of basketball.
hmm Yeah, I just thought that that was so interesting. I always find that the hobbies that people tend to gravitate toward often reflect what they do from a career perspective in some way, whether it's an opposite reflection or it's an altered reflection of what they actually do. So, basketball being a reflection of engineering was something that I thought was really interesting for you.
Yeah, I have been fortunate that I played basketball since I was 8 years old in a team setting. So I was able to understand and learn the game of basketball from some very good coaches who stressed the level of teamwork that you had to have to be successful. And I was on several championship teams, which sort of highlights that in your life. You understand and realize just how important uh, working together is towards a common goal. And when you're younger, that's the goal. You want to win a championship. And I also played on teams that we lost, and you sort of realize more importantly how valuable that is, the team concept. And throughout my career, I've tried to apply that as an employer because I used to own the company that I worked for, and before I started my own practice. And I tried to apply that concept to the 30 employees that we had. It didn't always work, but you always try to do the best you can.
Yeah. I think it's it's important you highlighted like the two things. It's important to learn how to win, but it's important to learn how to handle a loss and how to handle setback as well. That
Right.
type of thing makes you so resilient, and I'm sure that that was an intensely useful thing for you when you were facing a lot of that the cultural challenges of coming up self-taught in those first 10 years of doing your engineering work.
Yeah, it's funny that in those initial years, I fought a lot of perception that if you didn't complete a 4-year study program, that you were at best a technician, that you could not become a professional engineer. And I sort of took that as a challenge with certain people. I sort of resented the implication that because I didn't come through that way, that it wasn't possible. And I believe even today it's still possible for a lot of people. There are still states that allow that, and even if you can't succeed to the direction of becoming a PE, at least you can be successful in whatever venture you want to go after. I mean, it doesn't have to be engineering. You can be the best water operator or technician or anything you want to be. It's just a
Hmm.
matter of applying yourself and using the dedication to learning the craft and the trade that's involved in it.
Hmm. For sure, for sure. What are the so kind of pivoting a little bit, I wanted to talk about industry involvement. You had a whole list of kind of accolades of industry involvement in Oregon and even nationwide. Why is it so important for you to get involved with these professional organizations and to be, for that matter, on boards or make your way to a position as president of an organization like that?
Um, I'll admit my first impetus in that was proving myself. I wanted to be able to gain recognition for my peers that I was more than just a simple technician, that I had ability and skills in the profession. As time went on, though, it sort of morphed into more dedication to trying to make things better in my state and nationally as it applies. And then as time has gone on, I enjoy there's certain camaraderie, and you learn to these people that you've never known before. You start working with them, and there's enjoyment and satisfaction in that, and there's also some satisfaction in trying to improve the water profession or wastewater, whichever one I'm involved in at the time. And and again, that's sort of expanded as I've spent more time on boards and commissions. The last 20 years, it's been more appointed rather than seeking it. I've been asked to serve on a lot of these things, and that's fine for the most part. I've been able to do it, but sometimes you got to be careful. You can overextend yourself, and then your practice suffers or your personal life suffers, and that has always been my main goal, to try to find a good balance in that.
Hmm. Yeah, you also have done many presentations over the years. You've done plenty of written work as well. I know that you were saying that you have this monthly column that is a lot of work for you to do every single month, but it keeps you engaged in the industry and thinking about new things and trends and whatnot. Could you speak a little bit to that type of involvement where you get to share your knowledge with your peers and what that means to you?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, this is the 20th anniversary of when I started writing a column for the Water Well Journal, and I've I believe it's up to 240 now. I've written one every consecutive month for those 20 years, and I do enjoy sharing what knowledge I have gained through my projects and my experiences. But I also tremendously enjoy the feedback I get, and I get either comments or sometimes criticisms from readers who might disagree with me, and I enjoy that because it helps you never quit learning. You're always learning things you might have thought you knew, but you didn't necessarily know the right way, but it was your way, and you thought that was the right way. And so I've been actually several times I've been taken to task on my opinions or things that I've stated in my columns. And I appreciate that. I've always appreciated the reader's feedback. And like I say, I look at it as a way of expanding my knowledge base.
Hmm. Yeah, I've always felt the same where it's good to receive that type of feedback so you can understand perspective because without that stuff you don't really you can only see it through your own lens, you know? So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when I first started, it was actually server release because by then I had pretty much give up the game. I love basketball and I couldn't even play rat ball, which, is going down weekly and with your friends and playing that way. And it was just too hard for me to be able to safely do that without getting in more back trouble. So writing was somewhat of a escape, you might say, and help me sort of substitute my intellect for my physical um, enjoyment.
mhm. So last question here, and this is one I like to end on because it is a very good way to end, is just general advice that you have for industry professionals. Maybe someone struggling with their career right now, whether they're just starting out in the middle of it, getting to the end of it. Do you have any advice for industry professionals on how to approach things and maybe some simple principles that you've applied over the years that have helped you out in times of difficulty?
Well, I can state for my own example, the first time I took my fundamentals exam in engineering, you have to take two exams to become a PE. And the first time I took the fundamentals exam, I had failed and I missed it by 2 points. And that was not only disheartening to me, but it was also a challenge. I knew I didn't want to go through that again because I didn't want to repeat the need to study for these tests year by year. And the fundamentals exam back then was so difficult that you really had to know enough of it to be able to pass it. And so I was able to rededicate myself to learning what I knew I didn't know and picking up on, the type of things that I just needed to expand my knowledge base in order to pass it a second time. And that's probably the best advice I could give is that there's always going to be setbacks in anybody's career or anybody's forward movement. There's always going to be times where you're tripped or you run up against something and you have to back off and then regroup. And the main thing is not to give up. The main thing is if this is what you want to do, if you have to reevaluate it, but if this is exactly the type of thing you want to do, attack it. Go after with everything that you can do, and with the means and methods available to you, and just don't give up on it. And eventually, you'll most likely succeed.
Hmm. Use that self-determination. Look inward.
That's right. Right. Look inward.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ed. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today and get a little more insight into your personality. For everyone who is watching this, you can also read the article that we have on Ed in the description below. There will be a link to that. And once again, to Ed, thank you again. We really appreciate you taking the time and looking forward to communicating with you throughout through the
Thank you,
rest of
Bob.
this year and next.
Bet. Thank you.